Ochen ka'odam tumusun, uk'achad hasorim tipelu. Kuma Elohim shavta haaretz, ki'ata simcha b'chol hagoyim. Okay. So the truth is we're going to have this class today and tomorrow. So I'm going to choose the part that says 17, because that's a little bit smaller. We'll go into that. I don't think we talked about it. I remember last time we said that we didn't really go through this book yet. And number 17 is about the 7 mitzvahs, Bnei Noah, 7 mitzvahs that are an obligation for the nations of the world. What does that have to do with Moshiach? So the answer is that in connection to the fact that we're living in a time that's so close to Moshiach. By the way, he usually gives tzedakah after the Tillim. So I'm going to give. If somebody wants to pass this around. Thank you. In the year 1983, the Rebbe came out with a historic talk and statement, and that is the importance of reaching out to non-Jews that they should observe their 7 mitzvahs. I just first of all want to give a little introduction to the 7 mitzvahs, and that is that it says that from the beginning of creation, Hashem gave 6 commandments to Adam, the first man that was created, and that he should pass this on to the future generations. And those 6 commandments were observed by everyone. So then why do we refer to it as the 7 commandments of the children of Noah? It should really be the 7 commandments of the children of Adam. So the answer is because up until Noah, there were only 6 commandments. And in the times of Noah, Hashem added a 7th one. So the 7 commandments, where we know it, really start from Noah and on. And what's the 7th commandment? We'll soon go over what all the 7 are. But it says that it's an obligation for the non-Jews to observe these 7. These are their 7 mitzvahs. We have 630 mitzvahs, and they have 7. And by the way, even though it's 7, but that's just like us. We have 630 mitzvahs, but we have thousands of details. That's what halacha is. So too, there are 7 commandments, but there are many, many details of how a non-Jewish person lives a life, which is also spiritually fulfilling. Yeah. Want to say something? Oh, okay. So in 1983, the Rebbe came out and said the time has come that we should reach out to the nations of the world about keeping the 7 mitzvahs. And I don't have to tell you how this was so shocking to everybody. Both those who are Chabad Hasidim were a little bit surprised, even though, whatever the Rebbe says, we know there's much depth behind it. But they were surprised because there's so many millions of Jews that we need to reach out to. And the Rebbe never spoke about reaching out to people who are not Jewish. And this is all of a sudden something very new. We should reach out to non-Jews that they should keep their 7 mitzvahs. And certainly people who are not Chabad were really shocked. Of course, some people not only were shocked, but sort of ridiculed it. But we have so much work to do with our own brothers and own sisters. Why are we going out and doing all that? Besides that, there was even a bigger question. The bigger question is, it's unheard of. Look back 50 years before this, 100 years before this, 200, 300, 500, 700, 1,000. You don't find anywhere where any of the great sages that lived talk about going out and telling non-Jews what they need to do. So whenever someone comes up with something new, we're a little bit wary. We're not, God forbid, deviating. And they were saying, isn't this like deviating from the path of Torah? It was a big mistake, though. This is part of Torah. In fact, when you look in the Rambam, Maimonides, who writes all the halachas, One of the halachas that he writes is that it's a commandment that Hashem gave us. I don't know if it's a separate commandment, but when Hashem gave the Torah at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, he also gave these 7 commandments. But instead of giving it directly to the nations of the world, he gave it to us, and it's our mission to spread it to the rest of the world. But then the question is, so how come people didn't do it for hundreds and thousands of years? Why only now? If it needs to be done, why wasn't it done before? And if it was never done before, why are we doing it now? So Rebbe's answer was very simple. We know that even though we have to make every effort to observe every mitzvah, but if God forbid a person's life is in danger, then you desecrate Shabbos, you eat on Yom Kippur, everything. There are only 3 things that are an exception, but other than that, everything we do has to be in a way that it preserves life, not God forbid, endangers my life. Up until now, especially after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, if Jews in Rome would come and say, let us tell you what you guys are supposed to be doing, they would be killed without even a question. And the same was throughout all the years of history, wherever Jews lived. Wherever they lived, most of the places were hostile to the Jews. In a lot of places, they forced them to live in ghettos, and they hardly allowed them to really be very very open with their Judaism, and they were very fortunate if they allowed us to live as Jews. There was no way that a Jew in France or Spain or Russia or Poland could come out openly and make a statement about saying to someone who's not Jewish how, according to the Jewish religion, they're supposed to be living. That would be unacceptable, and not only unacceptable, but that would be dangerous. And because it was a danger, that's exactly the reason why for all these years it was never practiced. So what changed now? Very simple, there's no danger anymore. How do we know? The proof is in the pudding. These things are being publicized today. It's on the internet. There are non-Jews who have a movement called the 7 Noahide Law movement. There are thousands of people that belong to this. There's absolutely no issue. There's no danger involved. Not only no danger involved, but in many cases, there are non-Jews who ask to learn about it, to hear about it. They want to hear lectures on it. And I remember Rabbi Jacobson, this famous speaker, Rabbi Jacobson, he spoke to 200 or 300 clergy from different religions about the 7 mitzvahs Noach, and they were all excited to hear about it and give it over to their people. There are a lot of political leaders that came out with declarations. Even in America, the United States of America, the presidents came out with a declaration that if the world would follow the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, the whole world would be more stable and a better place to live. So we're living in a time that we're seeing that it's no longer a danger. If it's no longer a danger, then not only it's okay to do it, then we're obligated to do it. So a person who's sick, God forbid, and he has to violate Shabbos, doesn't mean that every Shabbos gets violated. When he's sick, he has to violate Shabbos. Once Hashem helps him that he's well and he's healthy, and now he's just like everybody else, not only doesn't have to violate Shabbos, he's not allowed to violate Shabbos. Same here. Once the conditions have changed, and I had this experience myself once. I was invited years ago to Albany to speak about the subject of Moshiach. And I'm asking people, ask questions, I give answers. And then one person, I see he's very upset. I can see on his face, it's like turning red. And in fact, he was so upset that I couldn't even understand what he was saying. Something about blood and about pogroms, and finally got him to calm down. And I say slowly what he's trying to say. He said, this commotion about Moshiach, you guys are going to create pogroms in the streets, God forbid, and you're going to do this, you're going to do that. In other words, the non-Jewish world believes that that person is Messiah. We're coming out and saying something different than them. So God forbid, who knows what's going to happen? What was my answer? My answer was, in English, there's an expression, wake up and smell the coffee. You know, this is being publicized in newspapers, New York Times, all those papers that the Jews believe about Mashiach, and they're saying this. And there are no repercussions. No one's saying anything. No one's coming out against it. Not only nobody on the street, no clergyman, no priests, nobody is coming out against this idea. So therefore, we're living in different times now. And the same with Shabbat Mitzvah B'nai Noach. It's true, in Russia and Poland, if a person would get up and say, we believe, in fact, that's one of the reasons why Moshiach is such a not known subject to many Jews. It was always low profile, because in Russia and Poland, to talk about Moshiach was also dangerous, because you're directly denying their belief of who Moshiach is. So why are things different? What's the reason? What's behind it? What changed it? So the Rebbe's answer is very simple. We're living in different times now. We're living in times that are very close to Mashiach. Once Mashiach comes, all the non-Jewish world will want to keep the mitzvahs. People always have this question, what's going to happen to the non-Jews when Mashiach comes? The answer is, just like Jews will be transformed and become closer to Hashem, the non-Jewish world will also become closer to Hashem, and they'll observe their mitzvahs and we'll observe our mitzvahs. In fact, I once had this discussion with someone and he was arguing, no, I doesn't believe that. I said, do you daven every day? Yeah. 3 times a day? Yeah. What's the last thing you say in davening? Aleinu l'shabeach. Right? What does it say in Aleinu? Right. It says that all the nations of the world will destroy their idols and their knees will bend to you and they will praise your name and they will talk about you. It's clear in the Aleinu, like he was shocked because you say this every day, but you don't pay attention to what's coming out of your mouth. Yeah, you're saying every day that all the nations of the world will recognize Hashem and they will serve Hashem and they will, it's not just that the nations of the world won't be fighting with each other or fighting with us. They will recognize Hashem. If they recognize Hashem means they will observe the 7 mitzvahs. So this is the answer. The reason why, first of all, now it's no longer a danger. Being that it's not a danger, therefore it's a mitzvah to publicize it. Why is it not a danger? What changed? What made the change? The answer is nobody made, Hashem made the change. Because we're closer to Mashiach, so we're already seeing changes in the world, just like the Tshuva movement among Jews can be explained. It's a spiritual phenomenon. You can't explain it psychologically. You can't explain how a family that is 3 or 4 generations not associated with Judaism, that the 5th generation decides that they want to go all the way, turn around. How does that make sense? Every generation gets further away. Oh, my grandfather was like that. That was my grandfather. Why should I be like that? And yet that's what we see all the time, happening on a daily basis, all around the world. It's a spiritual phenomenon. It's also a result of the fact that we're getting closer to Mashiach. So the same thing with the nations of the world, much more open. And there are many thousands of people today that observe the 7 mitzvahs because we're getting closer to Mashiach. So what are the 7 mitzvahs? If you look here at again, we're looking at the part that says 17, right? 7 mitzvahs, no, this part. And turn the page where it says 1a. Over there it has the list. So number 1 is carrying out justice, which means that every community should have a court. And they're going to make sure that things are done in the proper way. People are doing things, living properly, which means just that alone has thousands of details. What's considered stealing, what's considered dishonesty, what are you allowed, and not to hurt anyone else, not to hurt them physically, not to hurt them financially. Of course, all the other things that are not allowed to be done. And no blasphemy, which means no blasphemy, no adultery, which means, of course, one of the basic of the 7 is the belief in Hashem. So you're not allowed to, God forbid, pronounce the opposite of a blessing towards Hashem, and you're not allowed to worship anyone else except for Hashem. No illicit intercourse, which means relationships between men and women, men and men. All these things also have laws, just like there are laws that pertain to Jews. There are certain laws that pertain to non-Jews. What's permissible, what's not permissible. No homicide. A non-Jew is not allowed to kill. No theft, you're not allowed to steal. And the number 7, that's the one that was added later in the times of Noah. You don't have laws of kosher, but they have one thing which is like our laws of kosher: do not eat a limb of a living creature. Okay, the rest, these are things you want to read about, or these are details, but that's what the 7 mitzvahs are. And even now, I don't think you really find people that, just like you stand on the corners and we like to put on tefillin or you want to give out candles, we don't sort of go out there looking for people that are not Jewish, but if a person's not Jewish, sometimes you approach people, I don't know if you ever had the experience, are you Jewish? Some people smile and say, no, but can I help you? You know, they're nice. Some people get very angry. But if I have any kind of interaction with somebody who's not Jewish, especially if I'm working with someone at work, you know, you talk to these people, you're interacting, you might as well talk about something more meaningful, tell them about the Sheva mitzvahs. And of course, like anything else, you don't tell them a way like, I want to control your life. You're making them aware that there's such a thing called Sheva mitzvahs. And you'll be surprised. I had many times I went in a taxi and the guy says to me, do you have any of those cars with the Noahide laws, you know? And I felt bad, I didn't have the card on me. But there are a lot of people that are very moral, ethical, civil. They want a normal world. They can't stand the fact that the world is so chaotic the way it is. And I know there is someone who was very, very active in spreading the 7 Noahide mitzvahs amongst Arabs. All you hear in the newspapers is how bad they are and what they're doing. But there are hundreds and maybe even thousands of Arabs and even some of their leaders that promote the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So this was especially aimed at sort of general awareness, especially aimed at people who have influence over non-Jewish communities, whether it be a priest or whether it be a political figure. And again, people who already have interaction with non-Jews, that they could bring it up. But generally speaking, yes, when we do Miftzayim, mainly we're focusing on our own brothers and sisters, reaching out to them. But the same is, and therefore, just like a Yid, if he keeps his mitzvahs, he brings Moshiach sooner. I think the same would apply also with a non-Jew, that if they keep their 7 mitzvahs, that also brings Moshiach sooner. And also brings, you know, spiritual light into the world and brings godliness into the world, and that will help tip the scale. Any questions on that before we go on? Okay, so we decided that Chiyas HaMesim, Rabbi Dubov spoke a lot about it. So that's something was covered. The third Beis HaMikdash I covered the other day. So we're left with the first one, the prophecy of Geula. So we'll try to cover that today and tomorrow, which is actually the first thing in the booklet. I just want to say it's interesting to note about the 7 mitzvahs that one of the reasons that are given for anti-Semitism is because they say, because the Jews think that they're the chosen, they're better than everybody else. And that arrogance, that's what makes everybody upset. They're so arrogant, they think they're better than everybody else. Okay, it's very interesting to note because what happened on the other side of the coin, the nations of the world, like the priests and even the popes throughout the ages, they were the ones that said that if you're Jewish, then you deserve to be killed. Unfortunately, that's what happened. And that's where a lot of the anti-Semitic things came from, pogroms came from, the expulsion from Spain, that's where that came from. It came from the Pope himself, from the highest authorities. So the accusation was that we're too arrogant. On the other hand, what's our attitude? Our attitude is if you're not Jewish, then you're worthless. Our attitude is if you're not Jewish, you also have mitzvahs, and you can also be spiritually fulfilled. You can also do what Hashem wants, which means in order for the world to be the complete, perfect world, we need the participation of both. There's a certain avodah that non-Jews do by what they're doing, and there's a certain avodah that we do by what we're doing. In fact, there's a halacha that if a non-Jew observes Shabbos, it's against Torah. They're not allowed to. So it looks like on the surface, well, Shabbos was given to Jews, and you have no right to benefit from Shabbos. But the Rebbe explains it in a deeper way. The non-Jews' fulfillment in this world is by, just like we, during the week, we build, we go to work, and we do things to make the world a stable place. So too, the non-Jews have a mitzvah to make the world a stable place. And by not working on Shabbos, by taking a day of not doing it, they're violating their mitzvah, in a sense. To use an analogy, it's like the Beis Hamikdash. We're learning about this right now in the Torah, about the Mishkan, right? They made all the different parts of the Mishkan, the walls, the covering. And what happened with the Mishkan? This part, we didn't learn it now, but we're going to learn about it soon in the Chumash. What happened after they set it up? This week's Parsha talks about everything was done, and now they brought it to Moshe to set it up, right? Did you read that yesterday in Chitas? No one could lift it. So Hashem told Moshe, you lift it. Moshe said, I can't lift it either. Hashem, you just move your hands and I'll take care of it. So he lifted it. What happened once he lifted it? We didn't learn that part in the Chumash yet. So I'll give you a preview. The preview is, and by the way, historically it happened, these were the days it happened. The day that they put up the Mishkan the first time was the 23rd of Adar. After they put it up, Hashem said, now take it apart. They took it apart. The next day, okay, now put it up again. Same thing happened. At night, take it apart. 7 days in a row. The 8th day, they put it up, and now it's going to stay. Now they're waiting for the Shekhinah to come down. It wasn't happening. So Aaron said to Moshe, I'm sure it's because of me, because he is part and making the golden calf. And it's and almost like Hashem is publicly humiliating him, not allowing the Shekhinah to come down because of what he did. So Moshe said, no, it's not because of that. And he said a small prayer. That prayer is right now printed in your Tillim, chapter 91. He said that prayer. If you look in Tillim, you'll see 90 is said by Moshe Rabbeinu, Tfilah Moshe. And 91 is also by Moshe Rabbeinu. All the 11 chapters from 90 till 100 is all by Moshe Rabbeinu. 11 chapters. So he said that chapter till him, and the Shekhinah came down. So there are two parts. One part is building the structure, and the second part is the Shekhinah coming down. It's similar to what we said about the Beis Hamikdash. Remember we said both things are true. We're going to do it, and Hashem is going to do it. We're going to build the structure, and Hashem will bring down the spiritual part of it. So in a certain sense, the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, of all the nations of the world, will observe the 7 mitzvahs of Noach. That'll make the world a stable world. No stealing, no injustice. Everybody's living peacefully with each other. Everybody's doing what's right. They believe in Hashem. As a result of that, the entire world is solid, is stable, is decent. And then our obligation is to bring sort of a higher presence of Hashem into the world, and that we do through keeping Shabbos and doing mitzvahs and other things like that. So therefore, if a non-Jew is keeping Shabbos and not working on Shabbos, it's like you're not doing the job of building the structure. Their avodah is to build the structure. So we both have a responsibility, and together we have this complete world. What's number one? Number one, I mean, the first page here is about, what does it mean, the prophecy of Geula? So I have to give an introduction, and then we'll try to read this inside. The introduction is that anyone who has read any books or seen different things that was said by Jem online, we know there are many miracles that happen and things that the Rebbe told people what they should do or they shouldn't do. And then later it was clear that the Rebbe saw what was happening in the future. Even, I know about a little bit of the history in Israel. One of the prime ministers in Israel was named Ariel Sharon. He used to be a general. In fact, he was the general that won the 6-Day War. He wasn't the general, but one of the generals in the 6-Day War. And he came to see the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him, what are your plans? When are you going back to Israel? And he told him when he's going back. And the Rebbe said, why don't you stay another day? He gave him a reason why he should stay for an extra day. And he accepted the Rebbe's reason. He stayed for an extra day. And then they found out, he publicized it. It was in the newspapers that there was an attempt to hijack his plane. So that means the Rebbe obviously knew this. In fact, there was someone who came to the Rebbe later and said, Rebbe, if you knew this, you should have told everybody that's going on the plane, don't go on this plane. The Rebbe's answer was, the Rebbe always sort of made things more simple. But the Rebbe said, I didn't know anything about the future. I just know that he wasn't supposed to go on the plane. But really, the Rebbe does see things in the future, but he never used the term. In fact, like I just gave this story, he camouflaged it, gave different reasons why he's saying to do this and why he's saying to do that. The 6-day war itself, the Rebbe did not allow anybody, any of his Hasidim, to leave the country. The Rebbe, people were begging, my children are there. There's a story of someone who begged the Rebbe and said, I have a one and only child there. It's a lot of details, but I'll just give the story briefly. There was a person who had a very prominent position politically here in New York. And he had a friend who was connected to Chabad. So he said, please get me a private audience with the Rebbe because I have a one and only child. He's in Israel now, and he got involved with Chabad. He doesn't want to leave the country because the Rebbe said, I want to speak to the Rebbe. So he got the appointment. Him and his wife came to the Rebbe. And the first thing he said, Rebbe, I'm apologizing because the fact that the Rebbe would always give preference to people who were political leaders. Why? Because they were influencers. So even though it's one person, but they have good influence on many people. I remember the story where the chief rabbi of Romania came to the Rebbe. And he spent time there, and it was over an hour and a half. And he said to the Rebbe, I feel very uncomfortable, Rebbe. I'm here for an hour and a half. The Rebbe really was asking him questions. He wanted to know everything that's going on in Romania. But he said, Rebbe, I feel very uncomfortable. I'm taking up so much of your time. The Rebbe said, how many Jews did you say live in Romania? So he said 60,000. So the Rebbe said, an hour and a half is too much time for 60,000 people. In other words, you are 60,000 people, and your influence reaches 60,000 people. So when anybody who is a political figure, it's not because, they're political, they need to be treated differently, but if it's a political figure, he can have good influence on tens of thousands of people. So he understood that the reason why they gave him an appointment ahead of everyone else is because of his position. He says, I want to be upfront. No, I didn't come for any political reason. I came for something personal. And him and his wife broke down to the Rebbe. We have a one and only child, and he lives in Israel now, and he won't leave because he became Chabad, and they weren't religious, and he won't leave the country. So the Rebbe says, there are I have thousands of one and only children in Israel, and I told them all to stay there, not to leave. You don't have to worry, it's going to be good, and so on. And we all know it was incredible miracles that happened in the 6-day war. But the Rebbe never said those words that I'm saying this as a prophecy. You know what he said? It says in the Torah that Israel is the safest place in the world.
Why?
What?
Why? If he did that, then the whole world would know just like how great he was.
But that's how it was. He never openly said that. The one exception where he said that what he's saying is being pronounced as a prophecy is regarding the fact that Moshiach's coming is imminent. And that's what I want to talk about. Number one, where did he say that? And number two, why did he say it? You're asking why didn't he say it? But after the fact that for 40 years or so much, he never said anything about the future, that he's saying it as a prophecy, he always camouflaged it. So why over here did he say it openly? Why was it necessary to say it in such an open way? We'll try to explain that as we go along. When did he speak about this? So it was Shabbos, 1991, and the parsha of the week was Parsha Shoftim. The parsha of the week, which is Shoftim, begins with the words that every community should have judges. Shoftim means judges. Should have judges and should have advisors. And the Rebbe went into explain these two terms, judges and advisors. What does it mean? And I think if this would be a different time of the year, we'd learn everything that I prepared here. maybe after Pesach, but right now I want to give it to you more briefly. It's based on a pasuk in Tanakh. The Rabbi asked a question. Look at this, page number 1. This is a pasuk in Ishayahu. It's pasuk in one of the prophets, where he's pronouncing a prophecy about the future. And it says like this: Vashiva Shevtaich, I will restore your judges, Kavarishayna, like it was in the early days, for your Tzayich and your advisors, or they say counselors, like it used to be in the beginning. In other words, Mashiach comes, our judges and our advisors will be restored the way it used to be. As a result of this, turn the page, we say this in davening. One of the prayers in davening, which is about Mashiach, is exactly this. Look at the words underlined. Hashem, restore our judges as it was in the earlier times, and our advisors of old. Because that's another way of asking for Mashiach. The Rebbe asked the question, in the Chumash it doesn't say that. It says in every city there should be judges and policemen, shoftim and shotrim. And here it keeps talking about judges and advisors. Why did we change the wording? How come here it says judges and policemen, over there it says judges and advisors? And the Rebbe said the answer is very simple, which is that what's a policeman? Policemen are there to enforce the law. You go to a judge, and the judge gives a ruling. This house belongs to so-and-so, not to you. You owe this person $10,000. He gave a ruling. What if the other person says, okay, thank you for giving a ruling, but I'm not listening to you. What's next? And you call the cops. So the police come and they take you out of your place and give it back to the person who really owns this house. In other words, they are there. They're called law enforcement. They're there to enforce the law. And the same was with the Jewish community. We had rabbanim, which are sages, who gave the halachic ruling. What if the person didn't want to listen to the halachic ruling? So there were people that they were designated to enforce the law. They were called shoftim, which is like policemen. When Mashiach comes, there'll be no need for that anymore. Everybody will only want to do what Hashem says. So they'll be going to the same court of rabbis, and they'll be asking, so what's the story? What are we supposed to do? And they'll say, you owe him money. And they'll say, fine, if that's what the Torah says, I'm ready to do it. There'll be no need for policemen because everybody's ready to follow what the ruling of the Beis Din will be. So what will be there? That's why it uses the different words. Judges and advisors. Both are positive. You don't need policemen. What does advisors mean? So the Rebbe went into this at length, but he said one of the things it could be alluding to is prophets. In the olden days, we had Nevi'im, people who said, Hashem spoke to me, and Hashem gave over this and this message. And that was one of the ways of having a sort of, we all had through them, an open communication with Hashem. However, during the time of Galus, we don't have that anymore. When Mashiach will come, Hashem will bring back prophecy like it used to be. In fact, there's a pasuk, I don't know if I have it here, but let me see if I do, I'll show it to you, where it says in the book of the prophets, there's a verse that says, and I will pour my spirit, no, I don't have it, I will pour my spirit over all flesh, your sons and your daughters and your servants and your maids, everyone will have prophecy when Mashiach comes. So it will be prophecy when Mashiach comes. The question is, what about before Mashiach comes? Can there be prophecy or not? And most people understand that before Mashiach comes, there is no prophecy. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's no longer prophecy. Where's the source for that? So if you look at the next page, where it says number 3, this is what it says in Gemara. What you're looking at is Gemara, where it's underlined. It says, Rav Dimi from Haifa said, from the day that the first temple was destroyed, the power of prophecy was taken away from the prophets, and it was given to the sages. So the Gemara says, is it true that no sage before the destruction, weren't the sages also had prophecy. So the Gemara answered, well, it means even though it was taken away from the prophets, but it was not taken away from the sages. What does that mean? It means there are two people, both are great spiritual giants. One of them are described as prophets, and the other one is described as sages. And what is the difference? So there are many interpretations of what the differences are, but this Gemara seems to be the source that once Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there are no longer any prophets. However, the Rebbe goes into this at length, that there are many sources that prove the opposite. That even after the Beis Hamikdash, there were prophets. I'll soon go into a little bit of the details. So how do you reconcile that with what the Gemara says, there are no longer any prophets? And the answer is, and again, the Rebbe brings the proof of this, that there are certain things where the Gemara says this is no longer here, and it doesn't mean it no longer exists. It means it's no longer as common as it used to be. There was a time where there were many prophets. How many prophets were there altogether? If you look in the book of prophets, you can count them by finger. But the Gemara says these are the ones that were written up in the books of the prophets. But in reality, it says in Gemara, one opinion says there were 600,000 people that were Nevi'im. And another opinion says they were actually double, 1,200,000, 1,200,000 people that were Nevi'im. Which means that in every generation of the prophets, there were thousands of people, men and women, that were prophets. Yes, we know the famous one. Shmuel was a Navi, Chana was a Navi, his mother, Devorah was a Naviya. These were famous people. Why are they famous? Because they're written up in the book of prophets. And what's the difference? The answer is, those prophets, even when they said things that were prophecy, it was mainly relevant to that generation and to those circumstances and to that community. But those are written up in the book of prophets. These are prophecies that are relevant to all generations and all Yidden, no matter when, where, what, and that's why it was incorporated in the Torah itself. So in other words, there is such a thing as prophecy even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, but it's very minimal, which means versus years ago where there could have been thousands of people in a generation that had prophecy, now only a few people in a generation have prophecy. There could be great sages and very great people and spiritual giants, but to have a prophet and be a prophet, that's only a few in a generation. One of the strongest sources for this is Rambam. Rambam is a book of halacha. In fact, he's the only book of halacha that talks about the laws of prophecy. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch, you're not going to find the laws of prophecy. If you look in the Mishnah Berurah, you're not going to find the laws of prophecy. If you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, you're not going to find the laws of prophecy. You look in any other book of halacha, they don't talk about laws of prophecy because they talk about all the laws that are relevant today. The only one that talks about all the halachas, even those that were relevant and will be relevant in the future, is Rambam. So he has a section which are the laws of prophecy. And that's what you have here on page 5, 6, 7, 8. It starts off with, let's look at the first words. It is one of the foundations of our faith that God communicates by prophecy with man. And then he goes on to say, who is prophecy given to? So we don't have the time for this in detail. Tomorrow we'll continue more. But basically, what he's bringing out is that the Rambam writes, prophecy is not given to anybody. It's given only to people who are tzaddikim. They have to be righteous. And not just righteous, because a lot of people are righteous. They have to be righteous on a very high level to deserve that Hashem communicates with them in an open way. And then he gives other conditions that only under these conditions would they receive prophecy. When did the Rambam live? About 800 years ago. And with all the conditions that he gives, he doesn't give a condition to say that after the temple was destroyed, in our times, there is no prophecy. And that's one of the proofs that according to Rambam, there is no such condition, that prophecy can only be in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. The Rambam's opinion is, besides many other sources, that Rambam's opinion is that there was a prophecy in every generation, and it's not limited. Not some people say only in Israel, right? It's not limited to Israel. It's not limited to the times of Beis Hamikdash. It could be at all times someone that could have prophecy. So there's actually someone who published a book. I'm going to conclude with this because the clock is telling me to stop. Quietly, but respectfully. But there's a book. It's called "Responsa from Heaven." What does that mean? Actually, this name became famous or infamous a few days ago. There was a rabbi in France from a city called Orleans or Linz. I'm not trying to pronounce it. And this rabbi was assaulted by Arabs. So there's a rabbi who is known as one of the Bali Tosfos, which means he was one of the people who his commentaries printed in every Gemara. And he lived 700 years ago in France, in that city. And he wrote a book called Responsa from Heaven. What was that? Before he went to sleep at night, he took a blank piece of paper and wrote down a question. When he woke up in the morning, there was an answer. So he made a whole book of all the questions and answers that he put together from all the different times. So someone, a contemporary person, our generation, printed this book. And as an introduction to the book, he brings many sources where we find that even now there is such a thing as prophecy. And there were people who actually, that was their title. Like there was a person who also lived 700 years ago in France. His title was Rabbi Ezra the Prophet. It's brought down in the Gemara, in the side of the Gemara, the commentary. So there is prophecy, but it's not as common. And we'll soon see how the Rebbe relates that to the subject of Moshiach. To be continued. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
It wasn't, we got the issue. The windows, we have to make sure the windows are closed at the end of the day.